I'm well understood class. Yeah. Between the two of you, pretty fabulous. Somebody want to watch. I really want to say that on my son your class. I'm great. Like those right here. Are you doing lunch? No. Brian.
Last time, said Vincent Brown.
Yes.
He's not on.
Yeah. So I've been, so all of the, we've been emailing him and calling him, Mark, Griffith and I, and he never replied. So finally his guy must have visited and she checked his email. So he doesn't ever reply. So just now he handed me his application and a bio. So that's why that's this having thing.
Okay, because I missed putting him on my new list.
Oh, okay. So he'll be inducted more officially maybe at the next meeting or something. Yeah, that's why. I know he's been coming for like 3 months.
I'm also.
She does all the traffic. So.
And
basically. So I like. And the same I can do. I probably have maybe, but we got.
Yes. Hi, I'm sure. I got my email. Or I don't know how you have it. I don't have it, so.
I thought, okay, I, were you planning on this morning?
I did.
Okay, all right, so,
Okay.
but I did bring it on.
Okay.
I can travel here and I'll. First honoring.
Not yet.
Whatever, but,
Okay. All right, thanks. Come on. Two minutes.
Yeah, right now I'm going over. Well, I could, oh, okay, I don't know. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Trying to get back in here. Yeah, well, I love that.
This is our first April meeting. I'm Ashok Patel, your club president, and let's start with a breath. So checking everything else outdoors. Taking a deep breath. Remember, be mindful of our presence, of our friendship and fellowship, of our curiosity to learn from each other, and breathe out with loving kindness and caring for each other. So you practice that on your own anytime. I recommend you just keep breathing until the end. At some point. This month's themes are maternal and child health, as well as environment. We added that as a 7th global focus goal a couple of years ago. And the time is perfect with spring around the corner with some of our projects that we've talked about, the water project, landscaping, and our completion of our Guatemala Stove project. And does anyone sign up for a photo test? Lee, you're on. Thank you.
Say something.
The number list. Number 1. Number 2. 3. 4.
Will be beneficial for all.
And 5 is the final. There we go.
Ooh. Did you get that one?
NASA.
Thank you, Lee, for that. This is the truth. I had initially sent a picture to Sherston, which was a deep fake. So this is from NASA's website of the eclipse.
You got some flares there.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting.
Now Einstein had to use a solar eclipse to prove the double slit theory way back when, And there's obviously light at the end of the tunnel, or once the sun moves out of the way. So I think there's always going to be some way to find hope in the world. And this year's theme, Create Hope in the World, is definitely true for us. I would like Gally to come up and honor someone with Paul Harris Fellow pin.
One honor I have as past president is to present Paul Harris Fellow recognition pins to our club members that have contributed to the Rotary Foundation or have been gifted Paul Harris points from existing Paul Harris Fellow members. This recognition is named for our Rotary founder, Paul Harris, who started Rotary in Chicago in 1905. Rotary established this recognition in 1957 to encourage and show appreciation for substantial contributions. From an initial fund of $26, the foundation has grown to well over $1 billion today. The Paul Harris Fellow recognition acknowledges individuals who have contributed or have had contributions made in their name to the Rotary Foundation in increments of $1,000. Our club is fortunate to have recognized 464 current and former TRCR members as Paul Harris Fellow members. This award consists of a gold pin with stones corresponding to the recognition amount. Multiple Paul Harris Fellow recognition is given to subsequent $1,000 levels. And I'm pleased to award the Paul Harris +5 pin to Ashok Patel.
Slow down now. I'm not as good as A-Strap.
It's always the photos with the outstretched arm.
But then we can keep takes.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's good at that.
Congratulations on behalf of our club. It gives me great pleasure to present this token of our appreciation for supporting Rotary programs throughout the world. There will be 2 additional Paul Harris Fellow recognition. Sarah Gilliland is not feeling well, so she wasn't able to be here today. And Barry Amadio also is going to have the recognition of a +5 and Sarah as a +4. So we will look forward in the future to recognizing our fellow Rotarians for their generosity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ally. Marilyn, do you want to introduce guests, please?
I have 3 that I know of. So after I introduce it, if anyone else here, let me know. I think you better stay away from something. What is it? Oh, very close.
You have big mic.
So Audrey has a guest with her today, Stephanie Rudine. So Stephanie, do you want to stand up and just kind of say where you are from or anything else that you'd like to share?
Excuse me, I'm Stephanie. I'm with United Way of Homestead County, their VP of Resource Development. I moved to Rochester about 2.5 years ago. So yeah, happy to be here and meeting some more people.
Welcome. And right next to Stephanie is Aune. And am I saying that right?
You are.
So,
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, I knew I would kind of.
I completely understand.
Great. Oh, does it mean? Could be me.
Yeah, just everything what Stephanie said, it's great to be here. I'm from Ireland, you might tell. And I am a medical resident over the Mayo Clinic until June, so it's great. So I'm delighted to be here. And under the guidance of Dr. Patel, so I'm very, very fortunate. Anyway, great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. And last but not least, over at this table, also a guest of Audrey's is Mark Dockery. So welcome, Mark.
Hi, how are you? My name is Mark Dockery, as they said. I moved to Rochester last month. I am the new development director for the Diocese of Winona, Rochester. We will be moving the chancery over to Rochester in June. We're hoping the move will take place. So I have an apartment here in Rochester. I come from the St. Cloud Rotary Club. I'm transferring my membership down here. So, I have 3 daughters that live in Chicago and a beautiful wife that is taking care of her mom up in Kimball. So we're sharing time on weekends coming back and forth.
Okay, well, welcome. So glad you're here. And are there any other guests today?
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Reflection, Audrey? And then you can stay on your.
Oh,
There's a slide.
oh, okay. I wasn't ready, but I will be. Okay, for the reflection today, I decided, based on our topic, to talk a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion. With the question, can the individuals really bridge the systemic inequities that continue to plague our workplaces? For those of us who don't hold positional power, what can we do to drive change? While leadership teams have a big role to play, inclusion is not just a trickle-down effect. Experts say that the small, seemingly mundane interactions we engage in every day at work can make an impact. Water cooler chats, email threads, and weekly meetings are all spaces where inclusive behaviors can be modeled and practiced. That means each of us has the agency to create an environment that is safe, where everyone feels respected and valued, and where people can be themselves without fear or reprimand. This starts with practicing allyship or strategically helping fight injustice and promoting equity through public acts of solidarity and advocacy. Allyship requires us to become aware of our relative privilege and make conscious efforts to undo our own biases, champion the causes that matter, and act fairly as colleagues and emerging leaders. Thank you. So, thank you. Appreciate it. So we've created a process. So with their 100th anniversary coming up, we're going to be doing some special Paul Harris Fellow recognitions. And we've created a process where you can nominate people for Paul Harris recognition, meaning that they don't have to be in our club. They don't have to be a Rotarian. They can be, but they don't have to be. And you can nominate anybody from our community who has a service heart to be recognized over the next 15 months, starting even later this month might be the earliest, and then going through our 100th anniversary year. So I believe it's a simple process. It's a Google form where you can just go out and say who you are and who you're nominating and why. And then we have a committee that will be reviewing those and selecting who will be getting Paul Harris recognition. So is it coming out in the next Moccasin Flower? I believe that the list of the Google form, or we'll make sure everybody gets notified how to nominate somebody. So be thinking who you might want to nominate in our community who has done really important work and really with a service heart. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And yeah, I do encourage all of us to stay open-minded and open-hearted to identifying those candidates. I think in some small way, we're all Rotarians at heart, and we just have to let it get ignited some way, and not too big a wildfire. Next. Mariana, would you like to say a few things? And oh, actually, wait. Happy Bucks.
Happy birthday.
Lynn. And
Oh, we're gonna do the happy
Anya, I
bucks.
think is ready to share $1.
Oh my God. Here's the goal today. We're gonna see if there's something happy at each table at least, okay? We're trying to raise some money here. What's that? What's what?
It's for, just, I'm so grateful for my opportunity, and this was not on my list of, things this week, so the bingo card, but I'm delighted.
Anybody else? I'm happy to get a good parking spot downtown. Happy to still be around.
I'm happy because my son and his family are flying back from Asia to America tomorrow, and they haven't been back in the States since August of 2022.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm happy that, Big Ten team finally won the NCAA award. Suppose they were in the finals. Purdue didn't.
No.
Well, they were close. Usually, my year is, if I pick any Big Ten teams, they're immediately on the plus in the first round. So
Well, I'm delighted that the women finally are getting their due in the era of sports.
Yeah.
So every time I hear them, all these good studies, I am just delighted.
Thank you. Anybody back there?
I'm grateful for the rain.
Yes.
I'm excited that our Stewartville baseball team started the season 3-0 so far. And my son hit a free run home run the other night to help that out.
Anybody else? Come on up first.
Thank you, Lynn. I give some happiness to my daughter who turned 28 today, Angela. She's down in St. Louis. I'm also very grateful for Anya to come at the last minute and really enjoy what mentoring means in a broader way, to build community, to share fellowship, and to learn the values of service and volunteerism. So thank you with that. With that segue, Mariana, would you like to come up and share your journey to mentoring and being a mentor? And then I have a little tag for you.
Oh. Hi, everyone. Okay, perfect. Hello, I'm Mariana. I think I know that most of you. And today I just wanted to take a couple of minutes from the meeting to update you on the status and what have we been doing in the mentorship program for young professionals. So, as a reminder, this is the second iteration of the program. Last year, the program was led by Dr. Patel and Audrey, and this year I helped kind of put a group together and do some group activities. So I will just be showing to you some of the stuff we have been doing. So just as a reminder, the mission of the mentorship program for young professionals since last year is to increase the participation of young professionals in community and service activities. To this specifically for this year, we wanted to promote reverse mentoring because, as we know, mentees or younger people can also bring perspective and teach their mentors about whatever the theme is, about everything exactly, sorry. And to help us develop better interpersonal relationships to be able to succeed in our workplace, in our personal relationships, and in general as human beings. So next, please. So I was here a couple months ago, and we had a proposal of the activities we wanted to do.
the main ones as a group were have a launching meeting in which we wanted to invite a visiting speaker to talk to the mentors and mentees, pair the mentors and mentees at that meeting and ask them to set a SMART goal, something they wanted to achieve as a result of being part of the program. And second, we wanted to do a volunteer activity as a group or as a cohort. Additionally, the mentor-mentee pairs were we expected them to meet at their convenience to develop their relationship and work in their goals. So that said, next please. We did have our launching meeting. It was on November 16th of last year at Twix. And we were able to have Dr. Amit Sood give us a talk about resilience and how to take care of ourselves and stress management, which I think it was a great talk, and we were very grateful to Dr. Sood for providing us with his time. And in here, well, you can see the pictures. There's the cohort of mentors and mentees. And afterwards, we just had dinner, shared pizza, some pops, and we just introduced the mentors and mentees and expected them to continue working together. Next, please. Then we were able to have our volunteering activity. It was kind of tricky to have everyone on board for attending this activity on the same day, but we all wanted to help the Jeremiah program, and Marilyn was super helpful in organizing and putting everything together. So on March 5, we went to the Cook for Kids event and were able to serve kids for mothers and their children, which was a great experience. And I was impressed and got to learn a lot about the Jeremiah program as well. So I think it was learning experience and service experience for everyone. And next, please. And we did have one extra activity that we were able to attend. Celeste here, she's a Toastmaster, and she was able to assemble a group of speechcrafters, which is like a beginner level of Toastmasters, and we had 4 sessions, and all the instructors were very helpful and taught us how to improve our public speaking skills, but also how to better communicate, which I think it's very helpful nowadays. They even gave us tips on how to be a better presenter when you're giving a virtual conference. So we and I myself are very grateful for Celeste. She organized everything. It was like unexpected and very much appreciated. And next, please. This is the group activities we have done so far. As I mentioned, the mentor-mentee pairs are doing their own thing, but this is what we did together as a cohort. And just as a reminder, why is this program important for the Rotary Club of Rochester objectives and motivations? As it said in the Rotary Code of Conduct, Rotarians are expected to use their skills to mentor young people. And in the Rotary Club of Rochester Action Plan, it's also mentioned that one of their goals is to create an environment that promotes fellowship, mentorship, and fun. So that's it. Thanks so much for this short time. Please, if you have any questions, let us know or let me know. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you what we have been doing. Very nice.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and congratulations on your match to Vanderbilt for internal medicine.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, Anya, you're back on, a popular guest to start us off since I can't sing as well as you can.
Go for it.
And many more. Thank you. And for anniversaries, Doug, and Mark, thank you very much. Round. And a few announcements. Sorry, we're running short on time, so I would like, who was it, Chris, to just make a comment about landscape project.
Thanks, I'll be brief. Good afternoon, everyone. As many of you longtime Rotarians know, back in 2017, 2018, we started a program of planting trees in the Rochester area. 2024 will be our 7th annual effort to strengthen the community's forests. To date, Rotarians have planted 2,621 trees and forest shrubs. Plantings include Bear Creek Woods, along Bear Creek by McQuillan Fields, along Bear Creek and bike path adjacent to Highway 14, Highway South, Quarry Hill Park, and Quarry Hill Park along the entrance road last year, or 2 years ago again. While not planting trees in 2024, our efforts will be focused on preparing an area of forest near Quarry Hill, near the pond in Quarry Hill for a spring 2025 planting. Work this year will be focused on removing some invasive buckthorn, which we all know is invasive. I know it in my lot, and removing woody branches of diseased ash trees and so on. Park and Rec will basically staff it with all the equipment, but we need some people. This is a 3-club effort, and if you would be so kind, if you're interested, to sign up for this on Club Runner, on our moccasin flower, it would be appreciated. The the date is May 14th, which is a Tuesday. It's from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. We're doing that so that staff doesn't have to be paid overtime and so on and so forth. So hopefully we can get some additional students and adults to help with some of this work. So again, take a look at May 14th as an event, and as I mentioned, it's a 3-club effort, so we need to be probably 15 or 20 people, and so far it's Colin, Aldous, and myself signed up, so we need some additional help, please. So bring a pair of gloves and come on and have some fun.
Thank you, Chris. White Oak Park cleanup also needs some environmental volunteers, and that's next Wednesday, April 17th. I don't think there should be snow on the ground for Joseph and team, and it should be warmer. So thank you. Now with the program, I'd like Audrey to come up and introduce our guest speaker and tell us a little bit more about the mapping.
Okay. So Justin Cook is our speaker today, and I notice our 3rd Thursday service project next week is directly related to this, to mapping prejudice. So anybody who wants to help, grab your laptop, come here to the Even Hotel, and we'll be meeting to volunteer and work on some of these deeds that you'll be hearing about in Justin's talk today. So Justin Cook partners with his wife, Sarah, one of Mayo's most talented physician scientists, to barely contain the chaos of a household with 4 very active, involved, and curious children between the ages of 7 and 13.
Like many of us at Rotary, Justin is also both blessed and cursed with a community-minded spirit that leads him to seek out and take on roles in which he can serve his community. Among other things, Justin is an 11-season youth soccer coach with Minnesota Rush, a baseball coach with RYBA, a frequent volunteer and organizer of all sorts of PTSA events, and has served on the board of the Rochester Public School Foundation and is co-chair of the Education Committee of the Rochester branch of the NAACP, and is currently serving on the board of the Rochester Public Schools following his election in 2022. In the times between those things, Justin also practices intellectual property law and currently serves as Associate General Counsel for Intellectual Property at the Nielsen Company. Justin.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. I think the last time I was actually at a Rotary Club meeting, I was in high school in Davenport, Iowa. And was there for some sort of recognition that I can barely remember, but I do remember the lunch was very good as it was today. So thank you so much for that hospitality. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I will note that I am doing my best Phil Wheeler impression today. If any of you know Phil, this is really his passion project, and he is very much the driving force behind this initiative in the Rochester branch of the NAACP. I've been involved, and I'll do my best to convey some of the interesting things here. So what we sought out to do, and I'll just start out with a little bit of my own commentary. So much of the work that the NAACP has done and that I've been involved in is in trying to make accessible systemic racism, trying to make it something that is relatable for people. The way that I sort of have tried to explain this, or maybe just imagined it myself, is if I was an alien from another planet and I landed in Minnesota and I wanted to sort of perform some anthropologic study, and I observed there are these predictable systemic variances, significant discrepancy in household wealth, generational wealth, income, educational attainment, contacts with the criminal justice system. And the only observable thing that I can come up with that would have any sort of economic bearing or even is observable is something about the concentration of melanin in the skin. So how, how do I go about explaining that, right? And maybe as I'm collecting my observations and I'm trying to make sense of this, I hear people talk about this idea of systemic racism, and I think, well, but wait a minute, this is Minnesota. They weren't part of the Confederacy after all. They didn't suffer the indignities of the Jim Crow South, at least not to nearly the same degree as some of the places that come to mind right away. So what is going on here? There's a 56% gap in home ownership between Black households in Olmsted County and white households in Olmsted County. A little over 20% of Black households own their own home. Nearly 80% of white households own their own home. So, and home ownership, it goes without saying, has profound impacts on generational wealth, which then leads into access to capital, ability to engage in entrepreneurship, start businesses, participate in higher education opportunities, and all of this stuff perpetuates. So how did this come to be? So trying to make this accessible, trying to provide some examples was the genesis for why to go about going through these interesting property records to engage in this mapping exercise. So that's my own little colored commentary on why we went about creating these maps from property records reflective of information that's mostly 1915 to 1948. So, and I'm going to skip over some of this stuff because I think the actual covenants themselves are the really interesting part. But we can go to the next slide. I've mostly talked through all this already. I tend to do that. But the basic point is that through private agreement in property records, particular neighborhoods throughout our own communities, right where we're standing right now, in fact, were explicitly and intentionally made racially exclusive to make entire neighborhoods accessible only to white people for decades. And this was done mostly through private agreements, but made enforceable through government action. It had impacts on the ratings of those neighborhoods for mortgage criteria by the FHA under redlining practices. And it also, and you know what, I'm going to just go to the next slide because some of the examples illustrate this better than I will just by talking about it. So there's redlining, which is the way that different neighborhoods were graded in terms of risk for mortgages in particular neighborhoods by the FHA, which then impacts the access to capital and the ability to receive mortgage funding for those neighborhoods. And it's been well studied, and I'm not going to go into it here, but it's been well studied that to significant measure the extent of risk that was judged for particular neighborhoods was tied very much to the extent to which those neighborhoods included any non-white people. And one of the ways that there's this interplay between racially restrictive covenants and redlining is racially restrictive covenants was one way to increase the extent of risk that FHA would assign to a given neighborhood based on the likelihood that any non-white people would ever be able to move into that neighborhood. And then, let's just go to the next slide. Systemic redlining began in the 1920s under the FHA. Areas with, this is the point, areas with covenants received a higher FHA rating even after the Supreme Court ruled them unenforceable in 1948 because these effects perpetuated. Next slide, please. So here's a map of, just to provide a little bit of context of the different risk gradings under the Homeowners Loan Act in 1933. This is St. Mary's Hospital campus. This is about where we are right now, Kutsky Park. Blue was grade A, the best or lowest risk neighborhoods. Green was still desirable. Along the railroad tracks here were red, and then some of these other areas were grade C. So it's interesting to overlay that on the next slide with, and again, that was 1933. Now in 2020, the green dots indicate the proportion of non-white households aggregated at block level in some of these different neighborhoods. Larger dots mean larger percentage of people of color, households with people of color in them. The blue region has some of the smaller dots. The non-blue regions has some of the larger dots. It's been a century since these red line things were, neighborhoods were established, but the legacy continues. Next slide, please. So redlining you might be familiar with, racially restrictive covenants you might not be as familiar with. Phil Wheeler has been doing his best to make our community aware of them over the last several years with articles in the Post Bulletin, exhibits at the Olmsted History Center and so forth, and presentations like this wherever he can find a microphone. But the history is basically this. In 1843, the first racially restrictive covenants that anyone's aware of anyway, were recorded in Massachusetts, restricting ownership negatively against Irish people and Black people. The first one in the United States was recorded, or in Minnesota was recorded in 1910 in Minneapolis. First one we're aware of in Olmsted County was in 1915. And these things came in two different flavors. Actually, I'll just note that in 1926, these types of private agreements between property holders were challenged at the United States Supreme Court and held enforceable to the extent that they were motivated by enhancing property value and therefore not solely motivated by racial animus. That was the reasoning by the court in that era. Also, from the Plessy versus Ferguson days, this is not a, well, anyway. So in a real era of golden age, I guess, of impact litigation led by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund just before Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. The NAACP successfully challenged racially restrictive covenants and had them ruled unenforceable at the Supreme Court in 1948. Subsequent to 1948, we don't see too many of these agreements recorded, although there are still some examples. In 1953, they were made illegal in the state of Minnesota under the Minnesota State Constitution and illegal nationwide by the Housing Civil Rights Act. So it's interesting and maybe doesn't require explanation because it's intuitive enough, but for any other market that you could think of, intentionally limiting the pool of buyers would not be a way to increase value. It would do exactly the opposite, because rational economic theory would say that if you decrease the potential pool of buyers, you will decrease the value of the asset. But because we have a racist market actually values racially exclusive attributes of the real estate in question. So the logic is that if you signal to the marketplace that if you buy in this neighborhood, none of your neighbors will be non-white, that the market will value that attribute, even though it means you have less people to sell to. The racist marketplace will value that. And we were able to find evidence for that in Olmsted County, leveraging a lot of high school students from Mayo High School in particular, who combed through archive records from the Post Bulletin and found some great examples from 1929. Next slide, please. Where the Cascade Manor subdivision was being advertised. Some of the little highlights here got moved around to the wrong place. Sorry, Phil. The advertisement here from 1929 says Cascade Manor is restricted to the white race only. Over here, it's saying that it's highly restrictive as to race and buildings, and also restricted to the white race only. And if you continue to read through the fine print, it assures the potential buyer that these restrictions will carry on into the future and apply to subsequent purchasers of not only that property, but all of their neighbors. So it's pretty explicit what they're advertising and what is being valued. Next slide, please. Here's some other advertisements for the Garden Acres subdivision. Said properties shall not be owned or occupied by other than white people. That's in 1938. Next slide. So this is in 1927, getting ready to auction a property and offering to give a $50 watch to every white person 18 years or older who shows up to this auction. In 1927, a $50 watch is pretty remarkable, as long as you were white. Next slide, please. So these different racially restrictive covenants came in two different flavors. The easier way to do it, and the one that always made a lot more sense to me intuitively, was to apply the racially restrictive covenant at the time of platting the subdivision. So you've got this large parcel of farmland, you want to subdivide it into a bunch of individual lots for residential purposes. And then you, at the same time that you draw that subdivision map and divide it out into those parcels, you apply the same restrictive covenant to every single one when you sell it to each developer or new occupant of that real estate. And then every single one in that neighborhood has the exact same language. That's actually pretty easy because it only requires one person to make a decision like this new subdivision is going to be whites only, right? And so here's an example like that in the 1927 Cascade Manor subdivision. I think the next slide has the language blown up, just to give an example. The premises hereby conveyed shall not at any time be conveyed, mortgaged, or leased to any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. Any breach shall result in forfeiture of title, which may be enforced by reentry. Pretty significant remedy there. I have always thought it's interesting, and I am confident that the people that drafted this agreement in 1927, or this covenant, were not thinking of the location of the cradle of life of all of humanity, of all of Homo sapiens, was certainly in Africa. And so they have unintentionally, I imagine, excluded every potential buyer that is a Homo sapien. But in any event, it was interpreted to mean Black people, of course, and I'm sure that's how it was applied. And there were 787 plats that had that restrictive language in them. Very similar language recorded in subdivided plats in 1938, 1939, 1940 in Orinoco along Lake Shady, or the marshy area up there adjacent to Lake Shady. And then this is the far more interesting example, I think, just imagining the way that these things had to be negotiated. This is after a subdivision has already been platted, and you have a bunch of individual owners occupying each block each parcel on the block, to then retroactively go back and say, hey neighbors, let's all get together and apply a restrictive covenant that will limit our ability to sell our real estate to prospective buyers forevermore into the future, and thereby ensure that only white people will live on this block. What do you think? Now, I don't know, maybe you all have great neighbors, great tight, close ties with the people on your blocks, but I don't think I could convince every single one of my neighbors on my block to agree to any single thing. Certainly not about something that affected their property values or their ability to make free use of their own land. You try to imagine, let's all paint our doors red. Let's all build the same fence. Let's all put in the same sprinkler system. I mean, there's going to be one holdout, right? At least one. But in Rochester, there were a lot of examples where a bunch of people got together, together with their attorneys, and they all signed these racially restrictive covenants to agree that they would convert their free, uninhibited use of their land and ability to vend their land in the future into a explicitly whites-only enclave. So one example is this Belmont edition. And here's the example languages. Said premises shall never be occupied by a colored person. Said premises shall never be occupied by a colored person or for any immoral use. Any person of Negro, Indian, Mongolian, Chinese, or Japanese descent, et cetera, et cetera. The best example, and I think the one that really makes this entire concept accessible for our community. Next slide, please. This is more of the Belmont edition. So Belmont edition is part of Pill Hill, platted in 1939. The covenant applied in 1929. The next year in 1930, a much larger set of covenants were applied, led really, next slide, please, by, this is more about Belmont. Let's just keep going. Already covered the 1926 Supreme Court decision. So yeah, this is the one I really want to talk about. Led really by Harry Harwick and W.J. Mayo in the Williams, Healy, Cornforce, and 4 other subdivisions, which really is the area immediately south of St. Mary's campus, up to the Belmont edition. Belmont edition is the one that kind of swirls around and has the, oh geez, what's the big house in blank? The Plummer house up at the top. That's the Belmont edition. All of these other subdivisions are immediately north of that, basically up to the St. Mary's campus. 90 total properties together, all recorded within 1 year. And this is not about disparaging the beacons of Rochester's local history here in Harry Harwick and W.J. Mayo, but I think it is reflective of them being particularly influential members of our community. It sort of goes without saying at that time. And they had the ability where I couldn't convince my neighbors on my block to do any one thing about anything in particular. They were able to do this. They were able to get people to agree, this is what we're going to do in our neighborhood here. And what they put into each of the property records and had all of these amendments to the deeds recorded in the records is that none of said tracts or any part thereof shall be sold to, used, or occupied by any person of Negro, Indian, Mongolian, Chinese, or Japanese descent, provided that this restriction shall not apply to a bona fide servant employed by a resident thereon and housed in his residence. Servants are okay. Just nobody that owns the property. or lives there. So here, oh, sorry, here's what this looks like in our community. Here's where we're standing right now, or sorry, about here. The purple is the covenants that were applied at the time of platting. Blue are the retroactive covenants, primarily in the southwest area immediately south of St. Mary's Hospital campus. Some more covenants at the time of platting in Kutzke Park, up along the highway there, immediately adjacent to Jefferson Elementary between 10th and 11th Street. Down along Marion Road, close to Longfellow Elementary, and down on South Broadway, and then another neighborhood here, kind of along 14th, or Highway 14. And then we can, oh, and then, yeah, go ahead, sorry. So the different eras where these things were applied, Kutzke Park was 1927, and then up along 7th Street and 14th Street in 1945 and 1947, between 18th Avenue and the highway in 1946, and those were all at the time that those subdivisions were platted. And then, oh, and by the way, the dark brown are areas that the property records have been reviewed, and we can be reasonably sure that we didn't miss a racially restrictive covenant buried in there somewhere. But it's always a lot easier to prove the positive that we did find one than to be sure that we didn't miss something that was there. A lot of these things are kind of hard to read, and the text recognition doesn't work so well, so you actually have to like go through the records in a manual way. And then this is sort of the more northeast quadrant. This is Jefferson Elementary up here. There's a couple of racially restrictive covenants that were applied at the time of platting, immediately to the east of there, and then a little bit south, 1948 and in 1929. This is right next to Martin Luther King Jr. Park in 1915 and 1922. Those plats received racially restrictive covenants. Next slide. And then this is sort of southeast, more of these in the 1920s and 30s. And then this is the region that we already talked about at some length. It's really interesting to see kind of some of the familiar names and the old language and look at the actual documents themselves. So if you join Audrey next week and start looking through some of these records, I bet you'll have a good time with it. Actually, just reading the old timey font and the language of the day, you know, it's I almost feel like I'm listening to a tinny broadcast from World War II, something or other. Anyway, we've looked at a lot of records. There's still quite a bit left. That's what a lot of the gray boxes were there. And if you want to, oh, actually, there's one other point. If you keep going. So this is kind of where I started, that the wealth gap is generational and limits opportunity. It limits the ability to engage in home ownership. In Olmsted County, it's 56%. Statewide, it's 58%. It's a profound difference in Rochester that is not explainable by objective factors, even separating that generational wealth is going to affect the ability of a given household to put together a down payment. It's going to affect their credit rating. But even if you separate that out, which Neil Kashkari did when he was president of the Federal Reserve of the Bank of Minnesota, or Federal Reserve in Minneapolis, even if you separate that conflating factor out and look solely at the objective economic criteria, you would expect a gap in home ownership rate of 33%, not 58%. And so the systemic racist impact and the legacy of practices like this persist, and they're not helping us out. They're not helping our community achieve its full potential. The modern analog to this is many of us now live in subdivisions that don't explicitly exclude potential purchasers based on race, but they do stipulate minimum lot size, minimum square footage, minimum number of garage stalls, minimum setbacks from the street, all of which are intended to and do in fact influence the minimum purchase price of the properties in those subdivisions. And when you set that next to the racial gaps in income, access to capital, generational wealth, it is enabling an ongoing racial segregation in our neighborhoods. It's something that is worth giving some thought to, whether that is something that we benefit from or not. The other thing we did with our high school students is we engaged them in creating some signage to help publicize households that had identified these racially restrictive covenants and then taken the further step to work with the City of Rochester Attorney's Office, where pro bono attorneys there are helping homeowners that are so inclined to discharge these covenants, even though they're not enforceable any longer. You can record an additional codicil effectively into your deed records to say, we discharge these previous covenants. The current homeowners have no interest in enforcing these. And then have that recorded, and you can put a sign in your yard. Here's an example of what the winning sign looks like, I think, on the next slide. No, one more. There we go. It says, this house discharged its racial covenant. Yes.
That's my house.
Oh, it is. So you know more about this than I do, for sure. And good for you. So it's a tangible way to demonstrate your affinity for this process, your rejection of these past racist practices, and to continue to raise awareness, which is really the ultimate purpose of all of this, is to provide a tangible, accessible demonstration of what systemic racism looked like in our community and how its legacy continues. And that's pretty much what I've got for you. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Anyone have a question? Do you want to speak one question?
Please.
Is it possible now to add that red line covenant? Because I tried to do it. They used my house, I am a friend of Bill Wheeler's. They used my house. And I tried to get it done, and he said, don't try right now. There was a problem. You know where that's been?
So you're asking about being able to discharge your covenant with the Just Deeds program? Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I would punt to Phil on that. I haven't had any personal experience with the Just Deeds program. I know it started in Minnesota, in Crystal, and 7 other cities in the Twin Cities region. Rochester is the first city outside of the Twin Cities metro area to get engaged with Just Deeds. And my understanding was that they were moving ahead full steam, but perhaps they're waiting on something. I don't know what that would be. But Phil might have more information. Yeah.
I understand the realtors are behind getting the covenants taken out. How are the Rochester area realtors working with this group?
Go ahead. Yeah, so the question is, how have realtors been engaged in this process in the Rochester area? Unfortunately, that is a question where my ability to channel Phil's knowledge of our work of the Rochester branch of the NAACP's work in this area is not sufficient. So I'd have to, maybe I can connect you with Phil for that question. I don't know of any realtors that have been involved, but I certainly don't feel like I could say definitively that none have been. I just am not sure.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Justin, for a great overview and platform for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And with that presentation, we would like to donate in your honor to the Alzheimer's Association. I almost forgot. And before we adjourn, I wanted to share a gift that I got earlier this week from Greg Bartz of the White Bear Lake Club. He's hosting and brought down 7 anesthesiologists from Ukraine who are finishing a training session with our anesthesia group to take care of their wounded soldiers and others in Kiev area. But he got this umbrella, which is different languages for saying peace. Anya, how do you say peace in Irish?
So there's a few ways, I suppose, well, you could say it's more like sláinte, it's like a mixture of health and peace, to be honest.
Sláinte, yeah. Thank you so much. This just reminds us that peace comes in many different flavors and there are many paths to peace. Peace through service, which is what we promote through Rotary, health education, and I think the social justice, like we've talked about. This is also National Library Week, and Audrey, you have a good Facebook post for fundraising. So if you go to Facebook and look for that information, literacy, finding the language of love, finding the language through which we express our wisdom and care for each other is really important. So with our, thank you again for everyone that who attended today, the greeters, Tamsin, thank you for doing that. John Woodruff at Sergeant at Arms, 4-way test, Lee, and the microphone, invocation or reflection, Audrey, introduction of guest Marilyn, AV tech support, both Sherston and Joseph, and our speaker, Justin. John has a reminder that I keep forgetting about with our Rotary swag. Please sign up if you want jackets or a hat. And there's leftover food if you want to box that up and take that, you're welcome to, except leave a bag of chips for me. We are adjourned. Let's go create hope in the world and make peace visible.